Hello and a great day to every one of us. We are the Group 1 and we are going to present or discuss to you the country Malaysia. But before that, I'm going first to introduce myself. My name is Glenwigan Numbar and I'm the first presenter. We are going to present to you or discuss to you the form of government and structure of government of Malaysia, election process of Malaysia, economy of Malaysia, foreign relations of Malaysia, political culture and military power of Malaysia. And before that, I'm going first to introduce to you the country Malaysia. The country Malaysia is a country on the Southeast Asia made up of 13 states and 13 federal territories. Malaysia spans over an area of 127,720 square miles and has a population of about 30 million people. It has its origin from the Malay Kingdom, which was within the British Empire in the 18th century. The Malayan Union was formed in 1946 and structured to the Malayan Federation in 1948. Malaysia attained its independence on August 31, 1957. The Malayan joined the North Borneo, Sarawak, and Singapore to form the Malaysia. In 1963, however, Singapore was expelled from the Federation in 1965. So let's go first. So that is the introduction of Malaysia. That is how Malaysia formed and created. So let's go to form of government of Malaysia. Malaysia is a federal constitutional monarchy. Its government system closely resembles the Westminster parliamentary system, while the jurisdiction of the country are based on the common law. The state is categorized as a representative democracy. The form by the country federation constitution, which is the final authority of the land. Here is the federal government has its headquarters in Kuala Lumpur, while the federal executive of Malaysia is in Putrajaya. The federal government adheres to and is formed by a country's federal constitution, which is the final authority of the land. The federal government operates on the basis of power separation as outlined in Article 127 of the Malaysian Constitution. There are three branches of federal government of Malaysia, including the executive, judiciary, and the legislative. So let's go to the structure of government of Malaysia. First is the executive. Executive powers lies in the cabinet led by the Prime Minister, who must be a member of the lower house and command a majority. The cabinet is chosen from a member of both houses of parliament. The Prime Minister of Malaysia is appointed by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. This Yang di-Pertuan Agong is also known as the head of the state, the supreme head of the federation, and a ruler of the Malaysia country. And each of the 13 states has its own constitution, which must be compatible with the federal constitution. Each state has an executive council which deals with non-federal matters under a mandatory basis. The chief of minister answerable to elected state assemblies. Malaysia has two constituents of law. One is for the entire nation and is set by parliament and requires 2/3 majority to amend. The second is the Sharia or Islamic law, which apply to Muslims. The states normally determine Sharia, and that is the executive power of the government. Let's go to the judiciary. Legislative first. Okay. So legislative legislative power is divided between federal and state legislatures. Federal legislative power is vested in the government in two chambers of federal parliament. This parliament consists of two houses, the Senate, Dewan Negara, and the Hall of the People, Dewan Rakyat. Bills must be passed by both houses and assented by the Yang di Pertuan Agong, the head of the state. The Senate has 70 members, 26 are elected by the 13 state assemblies, and 44 are appointed by the monarch. The 222 members of the Hall of People are elected from single-member districts by universal suffrage for a maximum of 5 years. The monarch may dissolve parliament at any time, usually on the advice of the Prime Minister, and the election must follow within the 3 months. Federal government holds various portfolios including external affairs, defense, internal security, civil and criminal law, citizenship, finance, industry, health, and education. The federal government may also make laws to promote the uniformity of the laws of two or more states, and it may legislate on any subject at the request of the state legislative assembly. And that is the legislative power of government. So let's go to the judiciary. Judiciary system, originally based on British, operates in tandem with Sharia courts. The federal court is Supreme Court. It is the final court of appeal, and it is has exclusive jurisdiction in constitutional matters and in issues arising between states or between the federal government and the states. Appealing arising from the high courts come before the Court of Appeal. Session courts and magistrates court are located in the main cities and towns throughout the country. The session court are presided over by a judge and have limited jurisdiction in civil and criminal cases. The magistrates courts also hear civil and criminal cases. With more limited jurisdiction, all the judges are appointed by the monarch on the advice of the Prime Minister, and magistrates by the state authority on the advice of the Chief Judge, and that is the judiciary power of the government. And now that we discussed the form of government and structure of government, let's move to the next topic, the election process of Malaysia. Before the general election, the Yang di Pertuan, the head of the state, will officially dissolve the parliament upon the advice of the Prime Minister. This sometimes happens once every 4 years, but a full term is 5 years. The election will be held within 60 days when Parliament is dissolved. Okay, here is now when will this happen. The Parliament will dissolve on June 24 in general election here, but the Prime Minister can call for dissolution anytime before then. So who are people voting for? The Malaysian vote for who will sit in the lower house parliament known as the Tekwat Rakyat, comprising 292 seats, and this is a federal level vote. The candidates for the 222 seats are divided into respective constituencies. Or in simple terms, there are 222 constituencies and 1 seat to represent each area in the parliament. But there is also a second vote, which generally coincides with the general election. The people will vote for 587 state legislative assembly seats or Ahli Dewan Undangan Negeriya. Those assemblymen are elected to form the state government. This is a state level vote. Before that, I'm going first to expand this. Discuss of election process. Of how or who people are voting for. Candidates will either be nominees of political parties or running as independents, following the web seminar system. And there is also an upper house in parliament known as Dewan Negara. The people do not vote on the 70 seats occupied by senators, because senators are appointed by Yang di Pertuan Agong upon the advice from the Prime Minister. Each state assembly can appoint 2 senators to Dewan Negara. So let's go to who oversees the election. Now, 7 members election commission appointed by the King upon the advice from the Minister. King is the De Pertuan Agong. The first call to action is when Parliament is dissolved, and that is. So let's go to the nomination begins. So there is the 6th step for general election, and I already tackled the issuance of the writ, and this is the writ that I discussed earlier. Issuance of the writ, and then nomination of candidates. So in here, the nomination begins, and the candidates must first deposit Rm 10,000 to contest a parliamentary seat and Rm 5,000 for a seat at a state level. They will lose their deposit if they fail to get at least 1/8 of the total number of votes cast. Candidates are also required to pay a campaign material deposit of Rm 5,000 for a parliament seat and Rm 3,000 for a state seat. The deposit will return once all of the candidates' campaign materials are cleaned up within 2 weeks of polling. Nomination papers are submitted to the returning officer for each constituency. The returning officer will declare shortly after who candidates are trusting they are fit to stand for election. There are 3 premises which determine a first person can run for election. They must be Malaysian citizens of at least 21 years of age, of sound mental capacity and no bankruptcy. And third is the election campaign. This will begin after the nomination are decided, and at the midnight before the polling day, the campaign will include tours around the kampungs and holding serema or rallies. Rules of campaign: no use of improper materials, no illegal forums, and no going above campaign spending limits, which are Rm 200,000 for federal level and Rm 100,000 for state level votes. And the third is the polling. Followed by the polling, the voting day. Polling lasts for 1 day. Registered voters can cast their poll for both parliamentary and state level candidates. There is no date set for voting in the 14th general election, as Parliament is yet to be dissolved. And then the last is fifth is the counting of votes. Ballots are tallied by the EC officers, and then announcement of results. This is the declaration. Returning officers to each constituency will announce which candidate is the winner. For each seat declared, the number begins to add up for which party will rule in the parliament. So how is the winner decided? Using the first past to post system adopted in Britain, the winner is the candidate who gets the most number of votes of total ballots cast. So that is the election process of Malaysia. So, for the economy of Malaysia, my other group mates, Sylvester Adug, will going to discuss to you about economy of Malaysia and others.
Hello ma'am, I'm Sylvester P. Adug and this is my report about the economy of Malaysia. Malaysia is among the strongest, most diversified, and fastest growing in Southeast Asia. The country is a major producer of rubber and palm oil, also exporting considerable quantities of petroleum and natural gas, one of the world's largest sources of commercial hardwoods, and also agriculture, forestry, and fishing once from the basis of the Malaysian economy. Economic. Since the early 1970s, the government has championed a social and economic restructuring strategy, first known as the New Economy Policy (NEP), and later as the New Development Policy (NDP), that sought to strike the balance between the goals of economic growth and the redistribution of wealth. Official economic policy also has encouraged the private sector to assume a greater role in the restructuring process. Framework of the economy. The Malaysian framework of the economy started when the first Malaysian plan in 1966 to 1970 was introduced. The economic framework was continued with the implementation of the first outlined perspective plan. The main policy formulated in OPP was the new economic policy. Vision 2020 was launched in 1991 as the broad policy directions of the Malaysia. It provides the much-needed guidelines of becoming a fully developed and industrialized Malaysian by the year 2020. In relation to Vision 2020, the second outline perspective plan was introduced. The main policy implemented in OPP was the National Development Policy. Framework of Economy. In the 1991, NDP was introduced to replace NEP National Economic Plan. Vision 2020 was also introduced in 1991. It is a long-term vision containing broad policy directions encompassing various dimensions: economy, politically, psychologically, spiritually, culturally. Malaysia's key to economic success in the 1970s through the 1990s were basic policy framework and industrialized strategy. Foreign relations. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Wisma Pultra, as is commonly known, has been mandated to pursue the nation's foreign policy in accordance with the Federal Constitution of Malaysia, with the objective of protecting and promoting the nation's interests at the international level, establishing close and friendly relations with countries in the community of nations. It will continue to respect the international affairs of other nations and advocate a policy of non-interference recognizing the sovereignty of nations. Since Malaysia's independence in 1957 till today, the vision of the foreign policy remains consistent, that is to safeguard Malaysia's national interests as well as contribute towards a just and equitable community of nations. Achieved through upholding the country's sovereignty and promoting universal peace, like fostering friendly relations with foreign countries. In other words, Malaysia will continue to consolidate its relation with other countries and international organizations, both at the regional and international level. Also include of Malaysia's focus of neutrality and non-aligned status, pragmatic dealings with the United States and China, ASEAN centrality, and a disdain for great power hegemony, development of Malaysia's economy through trading relationship and promotion of human rights issues, particularly Muslim peoples.
Because of some problem in my group, I'm going to report the political culture and the military power of Malaysia. So let's start in political culture of Malaysia. Malaysia has a multi-party political system. The country has held free election and generally has changed prime minister peacefully. Citizens who is at least 21 years of age are permitted to vote. Women in Malaysia have remained underrepresented in the political process. But women involvement in political activities in Malaysia has become apparent since 1945. This is the start of involvement of political woman involvement in political process. So in women political roles were limited only to campaigning and voting. More recently, it is estimated that less than 5% of women are formally involved in politics and compete as candidates for parliamentary and state assembly seats. And this was occurred in 1985, I think. But in the upcoming years of election, women's participation in political activities is increasing until now. Most ministerial appointments are held by Malays, but a few posts are filled by indigenous and non-indigenous minorities. Because Malays are somewhat superior than the other major ethnic groups like Chinese and Indian, the Islam peoples. So the Malays are more superior than the others. So party affiliation generally based on ethnicity but somewhat diminished in the mid-20th century. So it was diminished in the mid-20th century, the superiority of races and ethnicity. Malaysia's political life and government were dominated from the early 1970s to the late 2010s by the National Front, the Barisan Nasional, a broad coalition of ethnically oriented parties. So let's go to political culture about political polarizations. Polarization over race, religion, and reform has afflicted Malaysia for decades and powerfully shaped its electoral politics and intersected it in complex ways over Malaysia's post-independence history. Ethnic Malay majority has enjoyed a constitutionally protected special status, while the ethnic minorities have been treated as a second-class citizens, like the Chinese and the Islam that I said a while ago. They are the second-class citizens. But what makes Malaysia's polarization so complex is the two additional privileges over religion and competing vision for political reform. So these are the two complex privileges in political culture of Malaysia, overlapping with an often intensified ethnic divides. So the division of the three major ethnic groups in Malaysia. Political elites regularly appeal to this device to mobilize supporters aiming of the winning the center ground and securing power. So it's the same in our country. Philippines, political elites. These polarizing issues have scattered efforts to reach political compromises, constrain the adoption of much-needed reforms, and fuel political instability. Malaysia's polarization feeds on three primary divisions, each of which has deep historical roots in the country. Main dividing line is ethnic. Since the independence, the dominant narrative of national identity has been that Malays is for Malays, the country's largest ethnic group. So that is the reason why Malays has become a superior ethnic groups in Malaysia. And the islands of Borneo whom not enjoy equal rights and status in various ways. so their involvement are not equally right in Malaysia. The country's prevailing racial hierarchy has faced repeated challenges which have exposed ethnic cleavages and led to different levels of inclusion over time. The Malaysian Armed Forces. So let's go to the military power of Malaysia. So the Malaysian Armed Forces have increased in strength and capability since the formation of Malaysia in 1963. So this is where the Malaysia had already got their independence in forming the Malaysia country. Malaysian Armed Forces Force, called the Angkatan Tentera Malaysia, are the military of Malaysia, consists of three branches, namely the Malaysian Army, Royal Malaysian Navy, and the Royal Malaysian Air Force. Malaysian Armed Force active personnel is 110,000 and the reservist is 51,600. The Supreme Commander of the Malaysian Armed Forces is the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, the head of the state or the King of Malaysia. It's the same in the democracy. The president will be the Supreme Commander. So Malaysia is ranked 44 out of the countries considered for the annual GFP review. So they are more powerful than Philippines. The three branches of Malaysian Armed Forces are headed by the Chief of Defense. Chief of Defense administers Malaysian Armed Forces with the assistance of the Joint Chiefs Committee, comprising Defense Intelligence Director, Chief of Staff, Commander Joint Force, Chief of Army, Chief of the Navy, and the Chief of the Air Force. So that is for our presentation of Malaysia, and thank you very much for listening to our discussion.